everybody. Welcome to the Training, Learning, and Development Community. Happy Wednesday to you, wherever you are. Super excited about this morning's episode. Jeff messaged me recently and just told me a lot about what he does. I'm super excited to talk to him about play, and especially in how it relates to L&D and especially like just in this time, in this environment we're living in. We can all use a lot more play. We can use a lot more fun. And honestly, it's something that I've been sort of thinking a lot about with TLDC. Like, what could I do to get people more engaged, to just generally kind of change things up a little bit? Because of course, since I sort of like, I'm kind of like the do-it-all guy for TLDC, how I go is sort of the way the content goes. And I'm like, we got to have some fun. So I do actually have started making some plans for some really cool things. Like a lot of I started that TLD Connect sort of series for members that is really cool. It's already, some people are already connecting that way. And now Jeff just shows up and with all of his ideas about play, and we've already been chatting back and forth on email. So I know this is going to be a fun one. We have a series of questions in the Ask a Question section down below on this in the interface. So you guys check those questions out. This is what we're going to be talking about. If you have questions of your own, please feel free to add. And then Jeff, if you're not familiar with the format, a lot of times I'll be just reading sort of what chat participants are sort of like asking and talking about in the chat. And with that, why don't you go ahead and just introduce yourself?
Let's do this. We're going to adapt, man. Let's do this. Okay, so Jeff Harry, Rediscover Your Play. I basically combine positive psychology and play to have organizations address their biggest issues and their biggest problems. And we use play or infuse play in order to have those hard conversations.
Nice. And so let's see, we're talking about you. Are you a Bay Area native, or where are you from, like originally?
Yeah, man. So let me give you the origin story. Originally from Chicago, I saw the movie Big as a kid. Do you remember the movie Big?
Oh, yeah.
Back in the day. And as soon as I saw that movie, Tom Hanks in that movie basically plays with toys for a living. So I was like, dude, that is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. So I started writing toy companies in third grade, 10 years old. And I just did not stop until I got into the toy industry at like 22, 23 years of age. And I don't know if you've ever gotten, what you've always wanted in life and then been so disappointed when you get there. But like, I was in a cubicle, they pad the walls. Other organizations or institutions where they pad walls, right? And what they're also doing, there was no fun, no play, no kids, no toys, nothing. It was like nothing. It was like we were selling socks or like microwaves. And I was in New York and I was like, I can't stand this. I left 2002, right after 9/11, moved to the Bay, moved into Oakland, found an organization that was teaching kids engineering with Lego, paying $150 a week, like a joke of a job. But they were playing for a living. So I was like, dude, this is what I'm going to do. And I hung out with them for 15 years and we built the largest like Lego inspired STEM organization like in the country. But we did it all by playing. Like we were just making it up as we went along. Like we had no idea what we were doing, no business plan. We picked cities because they were fun. We picked people because they were fun. We failed miserably and just kept trying and experimenting all the time. And then eventually Silicon Valley started to pay attention to us because we were getting large. Facebook, Google, Adobe, all those places. And they were like, hey, do you do team building events? And we were like, of course we do, even though we didn't. We just said yes to everything, right? You just say yes, right? All these top companies would talk about agile, disruption, innovation, all these things. But they had not created a play-oriented environment to do any of this stuff. So I created Rediscover Your Play to address bigger issues like toxicity at work, how to talk about racism at work, how to have hard conversations, how to deal with office politics, all that stuff that everyone tiptoes around. I'm like, no, let's go at it, but let's use play to address it.
That's nice. That's great. So let's talk about how you were relating play to L&D. When you reached out, you had listened to some of the podcast episodes and stuff, and so you wanted to appear on TLDC because you had some ideas about L&D and play. Can you go into that a little bit?
Yeah. So the interesting thing about L&D is a lot of the people that we work with are in that space, right? So they are, working with like I think it was like the Neuro Leadership Institute, and all these other like organizations to train on stuff. But what we always do when we approach people would be like, well, how are you implementing it? Like, you can watch as many webinars as you want about how to not be racist or how to, deal with someone that's toxic. But if you're not practicing it, what's the point? Like, really, right? Like, how do we never get to practice anything. Like, L&D actually gets to like study it, but then when they try to apply it out, to all the teams are like, we don't have time. We got to produce. We got to make money. We got to hit our quarterly numbers. And it's like, dude, like, football teams practice all week for 3 hours. We get no practice whatsoever. So we would approach a lot of L&D places, or heck, I mean, I even did our dealing with toxicity at work workshop with the Department of Homeland Security like a few weeks ago, just because they never had a chance to be like, how would I handle that hard conversation with that really toxic person? Let me get a few reps in this workshop so that I actually have like the gall to actually go have that discussion.
That's awesome. So just give me like an example of how exactly do you like approach? I mean, okay, so we're going to get into talking about the importance of play and all of that.
Yeah.
But I'm dying to know, just give me an example of like, how would you approach like that workshop, for instance, like when you're.
Ooh, the toxic. You want to get into toxic? Right. Let's get into toxic, man. Okay. So here, let me actually break down, because I'll give tangible steps that anyone can do. Right. Okay. So, and yeah, let me just go into that. And then later on, remind me, because I should go into how we even came up with this workshop, because it's ridiculous. Talk about play and how the workshop is actually called Dealing with A-Holes at Work Through Play. Like, that is the actual title of the workshop. And what we have found is that, first and foremost, you cannot let that toxic person run amok. Because as you can possibly see in our, society or our leadership, that when you let someone run amok, they can take advantage of everything, right? So you really have to set those boundaries really early on. So some examples of what we do in our workshop is we're like, all right, let's come up with a few different strategies. Usually a toxic person takes up a lot of time at a meeting. They usually take up 60, 70, 80%, and they suck the life out of the meeting. So we first tell people, all right, the first thing is you need to organize. So you're like, look, to a bunch of other colleagues, we are going to, over the next 3 to 6 months, start to occupy this meeting more. We are going to get each other's back. And when Chad, sorry, Chad, but I'm going to use you as the example. When Chad cuts someone off, like he cuts off Samantha, you'll be like, yo, Chad, I just want to hear what Samantha has to say. And we have to get each other's back and slowly take that over. So that's the easiest way. Then the next step is to actually confront that person head on, because a lot of toxic people don't know they're being toxic. They just don't. They might be just engineers that are really bad at communicating, right? So you go up to them either separately, or if you don't feel like you have the gall to do it with your colleagues. And what you do is you don't attack character, you address behavior. So you're like, yo, Chad, when you cut off Samantha and then Michael and then this other person, what happened, the impact you had was that you were basically communicating to us that you didn't want to hear what we had to say. And then that makes the rest of us not want to share. Is that the reason why you did that? Because that's what's happening. And they might be like, I didn't know. Or they might be like, I'll do whatever I want. I'm Chad. And then you're like, all right, okay. And then you actually start to then approach their supervisor, or if their supervisor is an a-hole, their supervisor's supervisor, but you approach it from, again, the intent of what impact Chad is having. Because SHRM recently did a study and found, this is October 2019, $223 billion is currently being lost in the last 5 years, just at Fortune 500 companies alone, due to toxic people. just those are the only ones that are willing to admit that they have a toxic person. So when you come up and you go, listen, I know Chad is a brilliant jerk. I know he brings in tons of money, but Chad also caused 4 people to quit last year. So even though he brought in $500,000, he cost us $700,000. When you bring it in from that standpoint and you're like, does this person represent the values and the mission of this organization? Then people might start thinking, okay, well, let me think about this. Now, this is not going to happen. Like when I've done this at my organization and other organizations, this takes time. But if you keep bringing this up and you keep setting those boundaries, that's really important. But finally, and this is the hardest one to deal with, is you also have to, if the boss doesn't want to deal with it, if no one wants to deal with it, you either have a choice. You either choose to suck it up and deal with it, or you choose to go. But let's say you leave and go to another organization and another Chad is there. Then you have to start addressing the inner Chad, the inner a-hole, the inner critic, because there's a reason that person triggers you. It's because something they're saying you actually believe. So you have to address that. But if you ask yourself, you're like, wait a minute, I'm not an imposter. Wait a minute, I should get paid better than Chad. Wait a minute, I should have time to talk at meetings. Once you start like believing that in yourself, the next time Chad cuts you off or does something rude, you can call him out right there and be like, Chad, don't ever disrespect me in that way. And then what that happens is everyone else is like, oh, Jeff stepped up to Chad. I'm going to start stepping up to Chad. And then everyone starts setting their boundaries. They start sucking the oxygen out of Chad's behavior. And then Chad then has a choice. Do I continue to act this way and frankly get like shut down, or do I leave? And that is how you can potentially address this issue.
So Jeff, and I know that J-Rock has some questions in there in chat, but what I want to like, how did you use Play to be able to address those issues?
Sure.
Yeah,
so
because I don't know about anybody else.
We actually have people act out what it would be like to be Chad. So you can actually feel like, what is it like to be this toxic person? What is, because you want to also be somewhat empathetic, be like, oh, what does this feel like? Do I like, having this power? Do I not liking having this power? Then later on, we have, a part of the workshop where we have discussions where you are addressing this person and it's super awkward and you keep doing it over and over again. And we role play it and we have people act each other out and practice against each other just to see what that's like. Because I think a lot of times we always think it's going to be harder than it really is. But once you have that conversation over and over again, you're like, it's not that hard. Okay, I can do this. And then you start to believe, as well as see other people, that you're like, I'm not the only one that has an issue with this person. Wait a minute, we can do this. This is possible. I have hope here. Because before, a lot of times feel like we don't have hope. Like, this is the way it is. This is how people act, and we're never going to be able to change it. But if you are able to ally with your friends and colleagues and be like, we can have these hard conversations, we can set boundaries, you start to believe it's possible.
Nice. Okay. Hey, Jeff, do me a quick, I just thought of something. You might have a second browser open. Just double check real quick, or another tab that might be running Crowdcast in another window. If that's the case, close that one, and that might be why you're getting some echo. And then that way you can keep your headphones in, but just take a look and see real quick. Sometimes that's why that echo might loop to yourself. If there is one,
okay,
close that
sweet. I think it's gone.
Okay, cool. There we
go.
Yeah, now I can chat with you. Okay, cool. So, all right. So we got that. Now we're sort of like talking a little bit about, having people with, kind of defining what a toxic person is. J-Rock is more like focused on, that people do toxic things versus actually being toxic individuals, which I would tend to agree. I mean, of course, as soon as you start talking about this, I started getting a little bit of PTSD of all the toxic, all the toxic behavior that I've witnessed in the past. But no, this is good. So let's start talking about more like why play is so important now. Sure. And I sort of want to ask that question, just knowing like, I'm one of those people that like, I do a lot like. So TLDC is like my side hustle, but during the day I'm doing a lot of like programming and just like a lot of technical stuff. And so I've got podcasts running in the background, and I know that like like over the last few days, especially, I've been hearing a lot about the importance of mental health right now,
Mhm,
especially during the pandemic.
mhm,
And I feel like this conversation is especially relevant because to be able to take care of ourselves, we need to start having more fun and figure out ways to
mhm.
have fun. We're at work all day. So, I guess I'm sort of latching that on to this question, like, why is play so important now?
So Dr. Stuart Brown talks, he's the doctor of play, talks about how the opposite of play is depression, right?
Mhm.
And especially, in the working world, like right now, 85% of people are disengaged at work. That was before COVID, right? So, now people are sitting at home and wondering, like, why am I at this job? What am I doing right now? And thinking about, where does play actually play a role? It plays a role in building connection. It plays a role in keeping culture. It plays a role in getting staff into flow. Like, one of the things that I keep telling a lot of team leaders right now is the conversation I feel you should be having with your staff is, hey, what is the work that you love to do most? What's the work where you're forgetting about time? Great. Oh, it's talking to clients. Oh, it's talking to other individuals. What percentage of time are you currently doing that work? Oh, you're only doing that 10% of your entire day or your entire week. How can we help you turn that from 10% to 15%? Because studies have shown if they simply let people do more of their flow work for just a little bit more, it has a huge ripple effect on all of the other work that they're doing. Not to mention, you're communicating to your staff, hey, I actually care about you. I actually care what you're doing, and I care about your mental health because I'm really focused on the stuff that is important to you and to the team. And if you need examples of this, right, you look at Google's 20% program. They give their staff a fifth of their time to pursue whatever project they want, as long as it helps Google. And what came out of the 20% program? Google Meet came out of the 20% program.
Mm,
Gmail came out of it. Billion-dollar ventures came out of it. Another
mm.
example, Zappos, Tony Hsieh. Oh man, gonna miss that guy. Like, what he was doing in his organization, I mean, he was paying people to leave. He's just like, if you don't know if you want to be here or not, I will pay you $3,000 to go right now, because I just want people that want to be here, that want to be their authentic self here. And that's why he had such high retention. That's why people felt comfortable enough to stay at those organizations. And right now, a lot of people feel like they have to be their professional selves, or pretend to be somebody that they're not, instead of being able to be themselves. And play helps you actually create that psychologically safe place to do that.
Nice. So let's turn that a little bit more towards the L&D side. So when you're talking about play and maybe say a training department
Mhm.
integrating play into whatever their curriculum, like, do you have any ideas or have you seen anything like that, or what's your experience on that end?
Yeah, so some of the things that we've done with L&D staff is, like, I run a workshop called Your Future's Where Your Fun Is with my colleague Lauren, and we actually helped staff attach what did they love to do as a kid to what is the type of work they do now. So what's interesting was Lauren, for example, loved to play sardines as a kid. Sardines is opposite, is reverse hide and seek, where someone hides and another person packs in and another person packs in. And all of a sudden you have 8 people in a corner and someone's like looking for everyone. It's a great game. You should play it with your kids. It's
I
amazing.
have never heard of that one.
Yeah,
Wow.
it's super interesting, right? Like, imagine like 8 people being like, quiet, don't say anything. This person's coming. But anyway, the reason why she loved doing that was because it was creative, collaborative, and connection oriented. Those were her play values. So we would help staff identify their play values from things they love to do as a kid, and being like, those values are super important to you. What is the type of work that you're doing right now that incorporates that? Like, what are we doing regarding that? So like, that would just be one example. We're talking about like trying to create an opportunity for feedback, because I know a lot of learning development programs right now are like, well, how do you give feedback, and what is the best way of giving feedback? And we'll actually use play to create like absurd ways to give feedback to people about something like arbitrary or ridiculous. Like, let me think of an example. Like, oh, I'm going to give you feedback on your Zoom background, which is ridiculous. Like, it makes no sense. And, you start saying all the positive things about it. And then later on, you say all the negative things about it. Arbitrarily, there's no relevance to it. But that, if you attach that to the actual feedback we give, where we actually take that in and we're like, oh, like I might have heard 80 great things said about me, but then all of a sudden I heard that one negative thing and that's all I can think about. Like, how do you give feedback in a more play-oriented way where you really are coming from a compassionate or empathetic place? Or in meetings, when you're actually brainstorming in meetings, how do people disagree respectfully? So we'll sometimes have like an argument where we're going to debate something ridiculous, like, whether Game of Thrones ended well or something, but then we'll have people come up with their arguments and then start to debate. And then we'll switch it and be like, you have to argue the other person's side. What does that feel like? What does it feel like to argue the other person's side? All right, now that we've done this with something weird, let's actually do it with something real. And then you starting to feel the empathy and the compassion and the connection to people because, you're seeing the humanity in each other. And I think that is the thing that is getting in the way of us building really strong workplaces.
That's interesting. I'm wondering, so it sounds like, you work a lot with like Silicon Valley types, Fortune 500, whatever folks. How do you like maintain that sense of play? Like with a lot of those, I mean, they're so serious, a lot of those folks. And, like I think of that because I have a 6-year-old. Mm-hmm. And so I actually have a ton of play. I mean, I'm so glad that in my work from home environment, I could disappear for whatever on a 20-minute break. And he and I just go and chase Pokemon around or, or just talk about, whatever, just the craziest stuff and have fun, just bounce a tennis ball against the side of the house and just, and hang out. But, like when you're in the corporate environment, maintaining that sense of play, is it just, I mean, how do you keep it alive in you? Like what is it? Is there a practice that you do?
Yeah, sort of. I mean, what's interesting is like, a lot of these tech companies, they hate play, right? They don't want to talk about play, but they love talking about flow. They love talking about like, how do I get the most out of my staff? So a lot of times when we go into these environments, one of the first arguments we say is, I think it's from a Stephen Johnson book, the future is where people are having the most fun. And you're like, all right, what are the organizations or the companies right now that are thriving in 2020 during this craziness? It's the organizations that are having the most fun. TikTok, Hulu, Disney Plus, Netflix, all these organizations. I mean, I'm not a big fan of Jeff Bezos, but when he started Amazon, I saw this in a documentary recently, he was solving some of the most interesting issues. So all the tech heads were coming to hang out with him, even though he was paying nothing. Right. So we first approach it from that standpoint of being like, a lot of your tech companies started off in garages where you were just doing things because they were fun. What happened? What happened to y'all? What happened to all that like goodness that like created this organization, and once you went public or once you like felt like you had to hit certain quarterly results, you forgot about that. Like one of the biggest issues that adults have is we get so fixated on results, so fixated on our quarterly profits, right? Or quarterly, earnings that we have to hit that, expectations are the thief of joy. So when you have that, then you are not able to actually be present in the moment. And tying it into the Bay Area and, Golden State Warriors, when Steph Curry is in the zone, man, he doesn't even know how many points he's scored. He just knows he's in flow. So we're trying all the time to get our staff in flow. And how I do it at my workshops is like, we start off by being ridiculous. A lot of times I'll do something at the beginning, and people can try this themselves, to start a meeting where we would have people look at each other. You get a partner and you would draw that person, and you only had 1 minute to draw the person. And people start freaking out because they're like, oh my gosh, I don't know how to draw. I didn't draw since I was 3, blah, blah, blah. And, like they're all complaining. And I'm like, 1 minute. I'm like counting down, right? And then they finally finish. And then they show it to each other. And they're like, oh, I'm so sorry. It's so ugly. Oh, I apologize for all this, And then we do it again. But this time I'm like, close your eyes. Memorize the person's face. Close your eyes. Now draw it. All right, now show it to them. And then I go, what's the difference? Like, why are you, and they're like, oh, well, the second time I closed my eyes, and because of that, I didn't judge myself as much. And I'm like, that's the space we need to be in for the rest of this workshop. But also that's the space you need to be in when you're like in meetings, when you're brainstorming, when you're trying to figure out the next best thing. Like right now, our brainstorm meetings, when we were going to the office was, you're going to go into a box room, you're going to sit at a box table, and then you are going to have 1 hour to come up with the best ideas possible. That sounds like the worst place to brainstorm meetings because there's no creativity in it. There's no play in that. So we just have to like reframe how we're actually doing our work because right now it's not working.
That's great. No, and just a couple observations in chat. These guys start talking about a little bit how D&D has helped them during, this time of the pandemic, because there's some play there. And, it's the same thing for me. It's like I showed my son how to play D&D over the summer. Even though he's only 6, we play these really like, just sort of like really low level, cool sort of dungeon crawler types of campaigns and stuff, and we have a ton of fun doing that. And then of course the Pokemon thing, and it really does take me away from sort of the seriousness of everything else that's happening, and also just my technical world that is going on. And I also want to say Nugget Head Kevin Thorne is in, and he actually has also an L&D focused play series workshop that he does, and he's kind of like the resident sort of play expert in our space, I would say. So, Kevin, I'm glad that you're in here. So now, I want to talk about rediscovering your purpose through play. Like you have mentioned that, like, it sounds like you're sort of alluding to that, where you're talking about where did you find that flow when you were a kid? Like, is that how it's related?
Where did I find it? I found it because at 13 years of age, and I have this whole story about it, but at 13 years of age, I tried to be cool. I tried to grow bangs because that was like really in, but I'm a Filipino Caribbean dude that had this huge fro. So I would put mousse in my hair and literally push the bangs down to make them like look cool. And I looked like an idiot because by 5th period, the mousse would dry up and I had a raccoon's butt coming out of my forehead. But like, I tried to be cool and I failed miserably at it. And I remember going to this pool party and I was at it and I had to like give up who I was, and I felt like such an idiot, because I like gave up and I was like, you know what, I don't want to be cool. Like this does not resonate with me, so at 14 years of age, I went in my basement and just started making up games for myself. And then my friends came over, like D&D and things like that. And I would just make up games for people. And then my friends that didn't want to be cool would come over to my basement and we would just hang out and make up games together. And frankly, that's exactly what I do now. I create a safe space for people to actually like be themselves. So, I can get into like some of the like small suggestions or tips that people can do in order to tap back into their play, if you want me to get into that.
Yeah. Why don't we do that? And this is totally like sort of, I guess bouncing off the idea of fully embracing your nerdy genius. So yeah, go for that. Let's hear some of those tips.
Yeah. So what's interesting is my play mentor, Gwen Gordon, talks about how you can't play while you're in like an anxiety-ridden state, an anger state. You have to actually calm and soothe yourself. And you learn how to do that from the person that took care of you the most. You almost adopt the nervous system of the person that took care of you. So you first have to identify what actually calms me down, what actually soothes me, right? So I have my best ideas, or like in that like flow state, when I take a shower, right? Like those, just when I get a flood of ideas. Other people do it when they walk, when they play basketball, when they do morning pages and they write 3 pages in a row, So you first have to identify, how do I calm and soothe myself? Then next, and this is coming from a play guy, but I challenge you to be bored, which is really weird that it's coming from me. But what I mean by that is not forever, but for at least 1 to 2 hours, block out binge watching Netflix, stop looking at your phone, and get like super bored, like super quiet. And Because think about it, when you were a kid, your best ideas came when you were bored, right? So we have to block out all that noise because we are inundated with more information in one day than people in the 1950s got in 1 year. And I don't know about you, but when I consume a lot, like I make a lot of TikToks, but when I consume 20 TikToks in a row, then I'm like, I don't want to create anything, because you're like, every idea has already been made, right? So then you can't hear yourself because everyone else is telling you what to do, what to register for, which webinar to join, all that stuff. So you got to block out all that noise, get bored, and then finally start to listen to like that inner curiosity, that inner child, that inner whisper. And it's going to be super quiet, but it's going to say something that is both really exciting and also scary. So it might whisper to you something like, start a podcast, create a video, email that person you've been putting off emailing for the last 6 months, start that side business, like whatever that thing, have that hard conversation with that person. It doesn't really matter what it is. It's just this idea of practicing listening to your intuition, listening to your own inner child, and following the curiosity and see where that takes you. So that's just one suggestion. But another one that's even a deeper one that I really love doing with a lot of clients is I have them reach out to 3 to 5 of their friends, and I ask them to do these 2 things. I ask them to ask these 2 questions. What value do I bring to your life? Because I think a lot of people don't know the value or what they do for other people. So like, what do I do for you? Why are we friends? So you hear that, what value do I bring to your life? And then the second question I ask people to ask is, when have you seen me most alive? And you can ask it in a different way. When have you seen me most creative, most playful, most engaged? You could even do this with your colleagues if you're like, man, I'm feeling really burnt out at work. Well, when have you seen me most alive, and what value do I bring? And when you get answers from 3 to 5 people, they give you all of this information about how you play or how you used to play. And then you can look at that, and then with those same people be like, hey, help me out. Can you help me figure out how I can incorporate more of this play into my work, or more of this play just into my life? As I saw someone comment about, like, what about for essential workers that are, or healthcare workers that are dealing with stuff right now? It's such a stressful environment where they're at, that what are they doing for themselves? What are they doing that makes them feel most alive and engaged? Because they need to be doing that for themselves when they are not, in those high chaotic environments.
That's fascinating. Hey, Jeff, when do you feel the most alive?
I mean, when I'm like doing stuff like this, dude, like, when I'm making TikToks, like I start my day making TikToks, right? Why? They have no ROI, they have no productive value, but why do I do it, right? Because it frames my day as like, it primes my brain. In positive psychology, we talk a lot about priming your mind. It primes your day to look at everything like play, right? And then my friend Desiree asked this great question, when something good happens, ask yourself, how can it get any better than this, right? And I think of it that way, where I'm like, ooh, I made a TikTok. Ooh, how can it get any better than this? Ooh, Lewis and I are now talking. Ooh, how can it get any better than this? Ooh, later on, I'm brainstorming with my friend, Lauren, on a new video. How can it get any better than this? And then you start stacking all those positive priming moments, and you make your day really powerful. The flip side is when you have a bad day, I challenge people, because I'm like, I don't think you had a bad day. What you had was you had a bad moment, and then thoughts usually last between 9 seconds and 90 seconds. And then you ruminated on that bad moment, and then you looked for other bad moments throughout the day. That's why you have a bad day. But if you can simply ask the question, how can it get any better than this, with curiosity, and look for those priming moments, you can actually make it a really powerful and productive day.
Wow. So it sounds like that, really, like that creativity, you unleash that creativity, and that's what really makes you feel alive, being able to get out, make those TikToks, all that stuff. It's kind of the same thing with me. I just was reflecting on, a coworker came to a show I played at one point at one time last year, and just out of nowhere, he like approached me after the show, and he's like, wow, he's like, when you play, you look like you're really alive. And I'm like, what? Whoa.
Exactly. And here's another tip for the L&D, folk, that you can actually get anyone to do, is you can actually positively prime a meeting. Meetings start before they start. So whoever's on the virtual, call first, whatever they're talking about, if they're talking about their baby or they're talking about something positive, or they're just like how they've had a great weekend or whatever it is, that actually starts the meeting. It positively primes the meeting. But if people start by complaining even before the meeting starts, that actually can negatively affect and make the meeting even more not productive. So think about what is the first energy that shows up to the meeting, and you can actually, even if you're not in charge of the meeting, positively prime the meeting.
Nice. Okay, so we're talking about, unleashing that creativity, but then you also have some suggestions about how play can really help with that inner critic.
Ooh, you want
and
to get
and there's so many of us that like also have imposter syndrome. I suffer from it tremendously, especially up here, like, in front of a microphone. But like, can you talk about that? Learning how, how can learning how to play with, can help that inner critic and producing.
Yeah, so I run a workshop called Playing with Your Inner Critic. And the reason why I emphasize playing is you cannot destroy your inner critic. You cannot slay it. It is always going to be there. And the reason why it's there is it's there to protect you, right? It's in your prefrontal cortex. It's the, limbic system. It's like, it's about protecting you from all the dangers in the world. But because we don't have those dangers like we had in caveman times, it just runs amok, right? So it's all about awareness with your inner critic. My friend Marcia Chandor put me onto this of like the power of like naming your inner critic. So here is quick things that you can actually do to address it. So the next time you're feeling really crappy, your inner critic has arrived. Your inner critic has probably been there for a while. It's just been hanging out with you, and that is when I challenge you to go, okay, pull out a piece of paper or like on your phone or whatever, and start writing down what your inner critic is saying. Oh, you suck. You're never going to be, you're always going to be alone. Oh, your podcast is not going to do well. Your videos are stupid. You're going to be broke your whole life. Like, write down all of the mean things your inner critic is saying, all of them, as many as you can. And then as you're writing them down, start to think, what does this inner critic sound like? And then what does this inner critic look like? Is it like my bully from third grade? Is it, that person that dumped me in high school? Is it my parents or my uncle or some teacher that shit on me? You start to think about like, what does it sound like? What does it look like? And then finally, when you get that idea, then name it, right? So mine is Gargamel from the Smurfs, because Gargamel would suck the life and the fun out of everything. So Gargamel shows up and is like, hey, Jeff, you're always going to be broke. You're always going to be, a loser. No one's ever going to love you. And like, it starts saying stuff. And now, because I've named it, I can turn to Gargamel and be like, thank you, Gargamel. Thank you for your advice. Thank you for warning me. But actually, let me think about this. Am I broke? No, actually, my bank account's looking pretty good. Am I going to be alone? No, I'm actually with someone I love. And, and you start to question whether the things that are on that list are really true, or are they always true? And then once you start to respond to that, that is when your inner critic starts to get quiet. When you shine a light on it. And you can even do this with a friend. I do this with my best friend Dana, where I'll text her and I'll be like, hey, Gargamel is saying these things to me right now. She doesn't even have to respond to me, but simply shining a light on it, then I realize how ridiculous the list is. As Marcia Chandor would always tell me, it's like, it's the same boring playlist of songs, right? And after a while, you just start to see the same stupid boring list that Gargamel, your inner critic, is saying. You're like, those aren't true. So the more you're shining a light on it, the quieter it gets. And then, and this ties in with the play part, you look back at that list and you start to flip everything, so you look at it and you're like, I'm going to, live in a life of abundance. I am going, I'm going to be surrounded by people I love. I'm going to be like, you flip everything and you start to read that back to yourself. And that actually empowers your inner child, your inner curiosity, your inner cheerleader to start popping up more. So the more you're able to listen to your intuition, the less you'll start to hear from your inner critic. And it's just like any muscle, you have to practice it. But never try to slay the inner critic. Simply acknowledge it, thank it for being there, tell it has to sit in the backseat of the car, and then be like, you can't drive anymore because, I got this.
Wow, that's fascinating. And and so you also had a question on your list about letting go of results. And I think that that's sort of part of that inner critic conversation. I know that, like, if you're at all like entrepreneurial or anything like that, and you're just like watching, like, tracking your successes and your failures and all of that, it can really just get into your head. But letting go of results, like, how can that actually help you achieve more?
So part of the reason why it can is, like I said earlier, expectations are the thief of joy. And a lot of times, if we're doing this as entrepreneurs or we're doing this in the working world, we're constantly comparing ourselves to others, right? We're constantly being like, I should do it Brene Brown's way or Simon Sinek's way or Gary Vaynerchuk's way, when frankly, that is not the way, right? The way is your way. It's for you to figure out what it is that you do really well. And I challenge people all the time, when you're doing your work, I ask them, who are you trying to impress right now? Because if you're trying to impress someone that you won't care about in like 5 years, then why are you doing that? We did that all throughout high school, trying to impress people. How did that work out? How many people do you even remember from your high school? So like Viola Davis says this quote, you either claim who you are or you end up chasing your worth for the rest of your life. And like, how many people do you know right now chasing their worth, trying to do something that is not even what they want to do? And one of the biggest regrets of the dying is like, I didn't have the courage to live the life that I wanted to live, but the life that other people expected of me. Like, people are warning us not to do this. So like, when you're able to let go of those results, a lot of times those results are external results that actually have no relevance to you. And if you're simply able to just focus on the work, focus on being present with the work right now, like, all right, I'm going to reach out to X amount of people this week for my business. And, I'm not going to think about what I'm going to try to hit my profit or my quarterly goals right now. I'm just going to focus on each and every person I'm going to reach out to, because that's within my control, right? Maybe my revenue profits are not as much within my control. So then I'm not like constantly worrying about that. I'm just focused on the things that I can be in control of and I can be present for. And the more we're present, the more we're able to do our best work.
Right. It's sort of interesting. Like, I'm thinking about Kevin right now, and Kevin has a workshop that it's called Step Away, where you kind of pull yourself, I would think, like, sort of out of your typical daily, daily work schedule, and it's a remote event where you play around with a bunch of different things like Lego. Yeah, step away from the noise. There you go.
Yeah.
Kevin's talking about that, and it sounds a lot like, that is sort of the focus of bringing play into your life, is to be able to step away from what like our current expectations are of at work. And can you talk about that a little bit? Like, how can L&D professionals be able to sort of like, if they incorporate play more into their day-to-day activities, how that helps them just kind of like get away from like what the typical is, and actually help them thrive a little bit more?
Yeah. So here, I'll answer it 2 ways. First, let's talk about 2020, right? Like December 2019, how many people thought this was going to be their year? Right? Like they were like, we're going to double my business. I'm going to get married. I'm going to change the world. Like 2020 was going to be it. And the reason why 2020 has been so tough for so many people is because we never let go of what we wanted 2020 to be. And we ran this in one of our workshops where we actually had people write down all the things they wanted to accomplish in 2020 that they wouldn't be able to due to COVID. And we actually had them mourn or like feel bad about the stuff that was on their list, then fold it up into a paper airplane and let that go. Just let it go. Not forever, but just let it go for now. Because, even with the last 22 days that we have in 2020, you're not going to be able to create something amazing until you let go of what the expectations were going to be, right? So that's the first part. Then for like L&D folk to think about, how do I incorporate more play into each and every part of my work? I would be asking myself, what is the work that actually makes me super excited? You know, and maybe you get a bunch of your colleagues and you can kind of do this, you know, as a brainstorm or like as a happy hour brainstorm where you know, gather a bunch of your colleagues together and go, hey, let's have a tipsy brainstorm. This is the stuff that I get really excited about. And then everyone inundates you with more ideas about that of like, oh, well, you know, well, this is another thing you could do with it. Or this is another thing. Like, I love designing curriculum. Okay, well, what is one of the biggest problems we're having right now? Being that you love to design curriculum, let's tackle this really important issue where we're going to use your strength. While someone else will be like, I love actually like running the trainings. All right, how many trainings are you currently running right now? You're only running 5 like per like every 6 months? Like, that's ridiculous. You know, so like it's exploring again what Marcus Buckingham refers to as our red thread work, or Gay Hendricks refers to as our zone of genius work, right? We have like zone of incompetence, stuff we're not good at, zone of competence, things that we're like okay at, zone of excellence, things that we're good at but we don't really like. We're just like we're happy. We like the praise, but we don't, you know, it's just like we could do it or not do it, right? And that's where we spend a lot of our time in our zone of excellence. But our zone of genius is the work where we forget about time, where, you know, you would do this work for free, right? You know, it has no purpose, it has no result, but it's just so much fun. And I remember once talking to a lawyer, because I saw this in the chat earlier, and she was like, look, I don't play, you know, I'm a lawyer. That's what, and I go, well, what do you do? What do you do at your work that's interesting to you? And she goes, I take people that hate each other and I get them to agree on one thing. And I was like, oh, tell me more. And as she was telling me, she starts lighting up, starts getting really excited. And I was like, that's your play. So like everyone's play looks drastically different. As I define play as any joyful act where you forget about time, has no purpose, has no result. You don't have anxiety about the future. You don't have regrets about the past. You're just fully in love with the process. You're fully in the zone, as we've seen Clay and Steph Curry go through. And it's like, how do I get more of that time at work? Because, and can I go into the 8-hour thing? The 8-hour work? Yeah. So I was fascinated with this idea of like the 8-hour day. And I'm like, where does that come from? And it comes from this Welsh labor activist named Robert Owen back in 1817. 8 hours of work, 8 hours of leisure, 8 hours of sleep. After 1817, no one paid attention to him for like 100 years and these ideas, right? And then 1926, Henry Ford implemented the 8-hour workday because he couldn't get staff to come work at Ford during the Great Depression because he was working people 11 to 15 hours a day and people were dying on the assembly line. So he made it an 8-hour workday and then doubled everyone's salary, which caused like a ruckus in like the whole like car industry. You know, since 1926, no one has done anything regarding the 8-hour workday. No one has questioned it. Yet studies recently found that most staff can only focus for 2 hours and 53 minutes of a given day. Yet Bureau of Labor Statistics say that we are now working 8.8 hours a day. So what are we doing for 5.8 hours of the day? We're doing stupid meetings. We're making up work just to look busy, right? We're on social media. We're going to get coffee, or now that we're at home, we're binge watching Netflix. We're looking for other jobs. Like people can only do work for 3 to 5 hours of the day. So knowing that, what is the work that you want your staff to do that is their best work? Because you don't get all of that time. You know, we have to really look at how we're working right now and see if we're coming from a place of humanity or if we're trying to treat everyone like machines.
No, I love it. That's great. And thanks for that insight. That's really, really good stuff. You know, and I kind of want to wrap up with this one. Now, you had this one question about how embracing a play-oriented mindset may not only help your business survive, but thrive. Can we change like business to say like career?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And how would you answer that one? Yeah.
So the way I would answer that is, it's interesting. I just saw this TikTok this morning where this guy, Robert Greene, was talking about how, you know, when you don't pursue your creative, like, outlets, it actually affects your, not just your mental health, but your physical health. So, and then you start to have more and more regrets, right? It's because you're like, oh, I should have started writing books a long time ago. Oh, I should have started doing this, And when we think about our career, we think of like, well, what have I been doing this whole time? Have I been doing this job either as a doctor or an engineer to impress my parents? Well, now my parents are old or they've passed away now. So what am I doing still here? Like, why am I doing the job that I'm actually doing? So actually questioning what it is that you love about your job. Does it really communicate like who you are? And as my business mentor, Stephen Worley, would always ask, how can I get paid to be me? Like, what can I do in order to get paid to be me? So I would challenge people in their career to look at what you do in a given day or in a given year and be like, how much of the work that I do is the work that I love to do, right? And then if I don't do that, if I'm not doing that currently with my work, that's when I would go to those play exercises that I did earlier, right? Where you would start to explore them and go, okay, can I incorporate this new weird nerdy type of play into my work? And if I can't, then it's just like, what can I do besides my job? Because maybe I don't have to have play as my work always, but I could at least do my work and then also have this play thing that really fulfills me. Like what you said, Lewis, when you're like, I play in this band, that gets me, I'm doing this podcast. That's another thing. And this energizes me so I can do this other type of work. So that's what I would challenge people to do, is explore that. And one thing that is really powerful that I see with some of my friends that are parents, my friend Marina, she's awesome. She's in like her mid 40s, and she just started learning how to roller skate in her mid 40s. And she recently like went to this pool where there was a bowl, and she dove into this bowl, and all of her kids were like, oh, that's so awesome. And she twisted her ankle and it was really bad. But the thing is, like, she still does it because that is her trying to try something new, trying to be vulnerable and step outside of her comfort zone because she thinks or believes that is going to bring her joy. Such an inspiration to her kids, because it's showing, not through words, but through action. Like, even at my age, I can play, and also I can take on things that are new to me. And that communicates to our kids that they can also do that as well. So we have to be thinking about that, of like, how do we want to get ourselves in more of a state of flow? And how do we do things that bring us joy and fulfillment?
Nice. And I do really like this one question that you were asking, like, what happens if you don't play?
Well, it's like I said earlier, is, Dr. Stuart Brown, like, the opposite of play is depression, right? If you don't play, it will start manifesting in other ways where you will have more anxiety, you will have more like stress, you might go into like a more depressive state. Like if Dr. Stuart Brown studied, animals and how they play. They actually play to survive. They find play to be as important as like love, eating, and sleep. And they practice play hunting. They practice, doing all this stuff because that's how they learn about the world. And frankly, if you think about it, your best moments in your life are probably play moments where you're fully present and engaged. So why wouldn't we be trying to pursue more play in our lives? Because, the whole idea of focusing on results, like, here, let me just briefly get into this, is like, I know people that are super successful. I know people that are ridiculously rich. I know famous people, not that happy, just not that happy, right? And they have everything. They can buy anything. They can travel the world. They can do whatever they want. And so many of them suffer from what I refer to as affluent deadness. And what I mean by that is like, they look dead in their eyes sometimes when I talk to them. And it's either because they're worried about losing all their millions, or they have $5 million, but someone has $10 million, or they just look sad because they thought when they got to this result, when they got super successful, everything then would be great. And it's just not. And then the worst part is they post on Instagram how happy they are. And then I ask them, like, why'd you post that? And they're like, well, I just want validation because that's the only time I get happiness and results and something. And you're like, you're selling this lie to all these other people who are also trying to get up there. So they're not happy up here. People are not happy down here. And it's just like, what people simply need to do is figure out what brings them present joy and fulfillment right now. Like, what do you do today that brings you, like, you know, a sense of aliveness, and do that? Because Howard Thurman says this, like, don't ask what the world needs, ask what makes you come alive, because what the world needs is for more people to come alive.
Oh, I love it. And I think I want to wrap up with that one, Jeff. Thank you so much. You know, and I think it's safe to say that, like, especially now, it's a critical time to start strategizing, incorporating play into your life. And I'm so glad that you took the time out to talk with us. I'm gonna, gleefully push this recording out, get it out to as many people as possible, because it really is important that we really start to actively play more, have more fun. We're going through a tough time in this world, and it's people like you that are really trying to keep things up for the rest of us. So I really appreciate you coming in here, Jeff.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. This was super fun.
Yeah, no, I'm glad. And I want to keep in touch too, just because you're awesome. And, I love seeing your story about the Philippines, and also, go Dubs.
Go Dubs. Let's go.
All right, man. Jeff, thanks again. We'll just we'll keep in touch. And everybody, thanks for coming in this morning. Tomorrow we're talking about reflection, which is like kind of related to this, I would say, in some ways, but reflecting in education, using reflection in education. We're gonna be talking about that tomorrow. So thanks everybody for joining us, and we'll see you later. Take care.
Take care.